What an honor. I really can't even tell you how excited I am to be here at a Culture Reframed Summit. I'll give you a little background just very quickly. Gail is one of my heroes, and I can say that from the perspective back in like 2000, I think it was like 16 or 17. I started following her work because of a TED talk she did, and it changed my life. It's like sometimes when truth hits you, it hits you like, like a spear right through the heart, and you realize what's going on, and you can't sleep at night, and you're like, either I'm going to do something about this or I'm going to ignore it. And that's when I made that definitive decision. I want to do something about this. And thanks to Gail and her research, she gave me the confidence and was out there very loud and taking a lot of hits and giving others the courage to follow in her footsteps. It's always great to honor those who've gone before us. And Gail, knowing it now for being in this for quite a few years now, I understand the pain and the suffering it takes to get to where you are. And thank you for your sacrifice.
Thank
So
you.
what an
Yes.
honor to be here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And really excited to present on this theme today. And we're going to be interweaving in and out of social media, pornography, sort of popping the hood of what's going on and discussing some really tangible solutions. But the perspectives of what I'm presenting today are going to come from actually youth. And that's one of the key things that my organization does, Wired Human, is we are just a platform to train youth to be truth tellers, to tell their stories, to tell their experiences, and go before decision makers, whether that be for senators invited to the White House, all the way down to local schools, to be truth tellers, to set truth free and set children and teenagers and young adults free to follow in their footsteps. So a lot of that is the DNA of what I'm going to be talking about today. But before I get started, I'd love to know, what do you all think the perfect product is? If you think about going to Target or ordering something on Amazon, or you think about starting your own business, what is the perfect product? You got a few seconds here, write it in the chat. See if anybody. Oh my gosh, yes, you stole my lines. The very first one that popped up. Somebody, let's see, Mandolin, something people need to keep buying. That is absolutely true. I'm also in a room, people who are probably speaking the same language. Absolutely. It's something that you can keep selling over and over again. It's instead of a gold bar that gets exchanged, you got to go get that gold bar again. You just have a gold bar that keeps reproducing itself and you can keep selling. And that's one of the reasons human trafficking is so devastating, is it's lucrative because you can keep selling human beings over and over again, whether that be through pornography or other means online. Attention from youth are being sold all the time over and over again, and they're being groomed into the perfect product. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today, what that perfect product looks like. But this is the generation in pain, because during that process of kids being and their attention being sold online, there's something at Wired Team when we talk about quite often is we have a tagline that says childhood is not for sale. It seems like the most reasonable thing to say, but it doesn't feel like it's something that is ever even taken seriously or considered in how money is being made off of this generation. And the consequences are absolutely devastating. And these are real youth. We did a project where we had our youth go out and ask their friends and communities, what they were experiencing online. And we had 70 stories pour back in that absolutely blew our minds. I mean, we had Josh over here talking about how he lost his brother to suicide. We had Reese talk about how she got online to follow celebrities and started seeing naked pictures of them and their OnlyFans channels, and so many more that I could just tell you that is just devastating to read when you think things that should be normal childhood. And somebody says, "Oh yeah, me and my friends used to get together and take naked photos of ourselves," or I watched my friends do that, and they would send them to guys they knew and guys they didn't. And this is all coming from somewhere, and we're going to talk about that. But it's important first that we start from the baseline of youth voices. And this is what youth are telling us all around the world, that they are in pain. They're being traumatized by this online world. It's intermixed with pornography and social media. And we'll break a little bit down of what that is and talk about the solution. So what I always ask when I go into schools and I'm interacting with youth is who knows you best? Who knows you best? And a lot of the answers I get are, oh, my mom and dad, or a brother or a sister, or my best friend, or maybe a coach who I, connect with on this team, and something on those lines. They know me, they know who I am. And the sad truth today is, because of AI technology, And AI is different than algorithms. Algorithms are preset processes that if A gets chosen, it goes down a whole channel to produce B or C. AI is actually taking algorithms and implementing them at scale, at speed, in the now, to be able to continually capture attention based on hacking vulnerabilities, which is it figures out what your temptations are, it figures out what your fears are, it figures out what your insecurities are, and it can channel these algorithms to interact with content to present to you, regardless of what damage it causes, regardless of how you feel after the end. And we're talking about children here. It just has one main goal, and that's maximum profit, which leads to a huge amount of bondage of kids that are getting trapped in this cycle. And so what we need to start shifting our focus on these platforms in general, and I promise you I'm going to make the connection to pornography in a second here, so this will all make sense. We need to change the focus of what these platforms actually are. And so if we go through the journey of the online world, some of you might remember Web 1.0. That blew up the whole research, the whole research dynamics, that suddenly Humboldt University in Berlin in Germany could now be communicating with Berkeley College in California and be uploading their research and instantly be seeing how our knowledge is spreading and being shared and contributing to one another. Then you had Web 2.0, which is a lot of like my generation, which was now, instead of just reading, it was the read-write web. That means that we could interact with social media. On somebody posts something, I can respond to that post. And that came with its own great freedoms and also consequences of that. But what we are in today is something completely different. Because of AI, we now live in what I call Web 3.0, where AI now chooses to interact with kids. It's not kids going online and searching out content they're interested in. It's AI interacting with that child and trying to figure out how it can groom them into the perfect product to make maximum profit, no matter what those consequences are. And you can compare that to a predator. And a predator is somebody that will exploit, that will manipulate, that will harm, because they have a specific goal and they don't care about how they achieve that goal as long as it's achieved, and that's maximum profit. And so now when parents ask me, hey, what kind of balanced relationship can kids have with a smartphone when it comes to raising them in this digital age, I say, we have to take it very seriously. Is it possible to have a relationship with a predator? My answer is no, but I understand that we have to raise kids up in the digital age. They need to understand the technology, so they need to be aware that the platform they are on or what they're using is predatory. That's a huge key point, because as Gail Dines once told me in a talk, I remember this clearly, she said that all roads on social media end at pornography. And we'll get into that in just a sec, but I just want to give a clear example of what these dangers can look like through AI. So AI deemed, for example, with Nyla Anderson, that the choking challenge was profitable. It realized that it was trending and it could shove it in front of kids' faces and get their attention. Now, something about attention is it's not targeted advertising, because so many bills out there are focused on targeted advertising. What this is maximum attention. Even if they show general advertisement, they have hundreds of millions of eyeballs on that advertisement, making tons of money, but it's dependent on engagement, that they stay online as long as possible to keep that scrolling going, so the money is continually being made. So the algorithm or the AI determined that the choking challenge was profitable. Send it to Nyla Anderson, a 10-year-old. She went and put a belt around her neck and hung herself and died unintentionally. And of course, because of Section 230, which is another theme of the Communication Decency Act in the US, TikTok was not liable, even though they sent it to her. And then the other example of that is just the classic eating disorder. 12-year-old gets on, sees fitness studio on Instagram models, and is like, I would love to look like that. What she doesn't know, that AI is choosing the 0.0001% of content that is absolutely ridiculous and unachievable, because it's going to make money, and pushing it out in front of a teenager or a child as the 99% of truth, which is a complete manipulation and a lie. So what they're seeing is all these fitness models that have photoshopped themselves, that have used AI to tweak their bodies and uploaded it online with an absolutely unachievable result. And that teenager now is pursuing that corrupted normal. Well, what happens is they go down this tunnel of like, oh, well, maybe I need to eat differently. Well, the algorithm figures that out. AI figures that out and starts sending them dieting, extreme diets, and try this, do the 100-calorie a day diet. Well, then obviously they're not eating, they're unhealthy, they're depressed, they go down the rabbit hole. AI is constantly thinking, how can we keep capturing? Here's the vulnerability. We know what they're after. Well, maybe they have mental health struggles. Well, I was invited on Fox News to talk to Dana Perino about why is there a 500% increase on Twitter at the time, sending kids how to self-harm yourself and mutilate your body as a solution to mental health problems. That's that cycle that AI, it doesn't care how it gets the attention, it goes down the rabbit hole and continues to produce that content. And so we have to take a quick look at the numbers. So Meta leaked out in an email, so that's Facebook and WhatsApp and Instagram and so on. And they leaked out in an email that the age out cost of a youth online, so a child that starts on their social media platform and ends at 18, is $270 across the world per child. Well, in the US and Germany and other countries that are more well-developed and have a lot more access to internet, you can multiply that probably by 10, but we're just going to use that number as a global figure here. Harvard University did a study and found out that across 5 major social media platforms, they're making about $11 billion a year. Well, let me give you an example of $11 billion a year. I do this with my kids when I speak with them. This is a jar of M&Ms. Unfortunately, my own children got into it, so it's not quite accurate, but it should be 1,000 in here. And each of these M&Ms is worth about $100,000. And so I always tell the kids, if I throw one of them into this crowd, you probably all pile on top of each other to get all those M&Ms, or if you get that one M&M. Well, then if you take this and I bring out a huge bag of candy and I say, each candy is worth this entire jar, what do you think that one piece of candy would be worth? And then in this case, it's 110 pieces of candy. And that one piece of candy is worth $100 million. And I throw them all into the crowd or into the children's hands to give them the idea $11 billion is an incredible amount. And when Meta looks at the global scale of this, they're like, we have a market value of $378 billion that we could make before these kids age out. So that is the kind of numbers we're looking at here with just one social media platform of what they're going after. So this is where porn and social media really interact. You have this motor of AI interacting with kids online, constantly tweaking hundreds of thousands of different navigation avenues with algorithms of how do we gain and capture attention. Well, obviously, sex is the most powerful tool, and we'll talk about that in a second, to grab attention. And so they're going to favor sex. They're going to favor those types of things. So what happens? You have all these porn producers and OnlyFans models or actors coming on and trying to harvest their following off of social media platforms by posting provocative things that are just either not illegal to the social media platform or almost, to get them onto their platform. The other thing is, when they're on their platform, that same AI that's focused on grabbing attention, that's so marketable and so good at producing money and so good at destroying lives, is also in the porn world doing the exact same thing. And their brains have already been groomed for it to think that way for years. And so really, we have sex sells, and I don't have time to go into all of this, but this is just a few things, that we can talk about. And I got this out of the book I wrote back then. We took some numbers and we found that, for example, Pornhub used to brag about this all the time. They don't do anymore. But at one point they bragged that 4.6 billion hours was consumed in just 1 year on their platform. That's 52.5 thousand decades. That's a whole lot of pornography. You can see that through that number, how effective it is. And we're finding that exposure rates, that as young as starting at 11 years old, which I would argue, working with a lot of kids, it's probably younger, but that's what research is showing. And that 93% of boys and 62% of girls, according to research, is exposed to pornography. We could go on and on. It creates massive insecurities. It creates huge disconnect between emotional intimacy and sex. It creates unbelievable, unrealistic expectations that the average genital size of a man shown in porn is around 8 inches, and the average size, according to research, is about 5.2 inches. So now you have 45% of boys and men saying, I'm inadequate and I need to get a surgery, or I wish that I could somehow fix myself to make myself better. It's creating a whole bunch of dysfunction, and we'll talk about a little bit more of how extreme it actually goes. So just to give kind of the playbook of what the big tech industry is doing and how pornography and social media are using the same mechanisms and leading to the very same places, is 90% of addiction starts, the behavior of addiction started before somebody turned 18, 90% of the time. That tells you a lot about childhood. And by 12 years old, we have the use it or lose it principle, where hundreds of millions of neurological connections in the brain are being pruned out and hardwired. And that's a whole phase where the brain is really figuring out what's valuable, what should I know for adulthood, what's my go-to responses. If you've ever found money on the ground, you know what I'm talking about. When you went out to the parking lot and there was a $5 bill, maybe a $10 bill, the next time you go out to the parking lot, your brain's already scanning for it as a child, looking for it because it remembered that reward. And every time the brain is hit with dopamine, it actually sends a construction crew in the brain. I know this is probably, people have heard this a lot, so I won't stick on it too long. It sends a construction crew, and based on the amount of dopamine released in the brain, it solidifies an equally strong connection between the neurons in the brain to remember how to re-achieve that dopamine reward. That's amazing for a sexual relationship with somebody you truly love, like your wife and spouse, because you're having a sexual intimacy in the context of a whole bunch of other things. For me, it's being a good man, fulfilling my duties around the house and as a provider for my family and raising my kids well. It's all interconnected. With pornography, it means just flipping open your screen and consuming and getting that same dopamine reward, and that same potential that wires me to be the defender and lover of my wife is how children are being wired to a smartphone, which makes them really, honestly, the perfect product. If you can wire somebody to your product that intensely, and they become the product that you sell to advertisers, I don't see a better product out there that's more nefariously created than what we're seeing with the online world. Moving forward is the whole habituation, emptiness, and manipulation. So when dopamine overwhelms the brain, we know that it shuts down the dopamine receptors. So they have to keep going deeper, but they're not being fulfilled, which creates emptiness. And the problem is, it's the never-ending buffet. You can never fill yourself up, but your brain along the way has wired itself to all this crap. So you are manipulated. You have changed the way you think. And we know stories from like Gabe Deem from Reboot Nation that's out there talking about what it was like to go and not be able to have sex anymore at 22 years old because he started consuming pornography as a preteen. And it led to a whole journey of him fasting pornography to get back on track again and being able to experience intimacy. And we see other research saying that when you take a child's smartphone away, it's interesting that borderline personality disorder goes away too, in some cases. And we're seeing dissociative identity disorders fade away after the smartphone gets taken away because all that garbage isn't manipulating their brain behind the scenes. And a great example is Billie Eilish. I'm sure some of you have heard this, but she has an incredible quote where she goes on the Howard Stern show and says, porn really destroyed my life. It taught me to allow men to abuse me, to do things I would have never, ever, ever, ever agreed with normally, and make decisions about my sex life that were completely corrupted by the porn industry that had groomed me to think that that's what love was. And so really what we're seeing is a huge problem with self-esteem issues, because what kids and youth are doing through pornography and going down these channels of social media, they are vastly groomed, coming out the other end of the conveyor belt, groomed as the perfect product that have difficulty with self-control, self-regulation, difficulty with the connection to their prefrontal cortex that regulates logic and reasoning and forward thinking. And they've been completely cut off from their inner self and their heart to understand who they are, where they're headed with their life, what their values are, because they keep looking to see a reflection back of themselves. And what they get is something so corrupted and so disgusting and so vile, that it should be considered a human rights violation, personally, against children's rights. And it's just not being enforced. So really what we would promote here is that the glass of your screen will never reflect back your value. That's really only for somebody and trusted people in your life, to be able to look at you, from great friends, from family, from parents that say you're amazing. So at this point, I hope you're not overwhelmed. We're going to turn the corner here, and I'm going to be disciplined and bring this to an end. But that outlays a lot of the problems. And I hope what we're really seeing in this talk, what you're taking away from this, is how AI has really changed this entire discussion. Because now you have a sentiental thing in the background that is plugged into the monetization machine that has put this all on steroids. And it's devastating, and it's only the beginning, something we really have to think about. But how do we get our power back? Because that's really at the issue of what I talk to kids. They've taken your power. It's about getting your power back. And when I look at that, this is what the R.U.M.B model is. We talk about it in our book, The Glass Between Us. This is outlined throughout the whole book. It's R.U.M.B, by the way, is an old navigation term, an old navigation term. It's now called just R.U.M B, R-U-M, but it used to be R.U.M.B. And we think that navigation term is a cool acronym for talking about relationship, understanding, mentorship, and boundaries. A lot of teachers, parents, social workers, whoever working with kids, we always want to default to starting with the boundaries because they're the most clear-cut answers. If we don't like our kids' behavior with the phone, snap it away from them, rip their PlayStation out of the wall, whatever we need to do. Those could be very reasonable actions, but we would argue or promote that we start with relationship. And the question there is, any teenager or kid I work with, they want to know is what's important to me matters to you, and what matters to me is important to you. And if you can build that as a relational baseline, you will create a wide open door to have some pretty amazing conversations. Then we have understanding, and that's the next part. And that's not understanding just the problem with technology and trying to tell them all about it. That's actually understanding what the core fundamental human needs are. And those core fundamental needs will really inform you of how to help them see a world outside of this tech and porn world. So let's talk about pornography. There's a lot of shame connected to that. But when you do the understanding part and you come to them and say, your sexuality is beautiful, it's amazing, it's designed with a purpose, it'll take you to places, it has the potential to create life, solidify intimacy and all these things that we could talk about and don't have time for. But in the wrong context, in the wrong ways, it can be just as equally devastating and damaging and destroy lives. And so what you're trying to experience through pornography is you actually going after a legitimate need. And anytime we make a bad decision, it's usually a poor attempt to meet a really legitimate need. And so when kids actually see their sexuality, or I would say in this case, teens, see their sexuality as something that's beautiful and worth fighting for and worth protecting, and pornography is something that is coming into their lives and causing a destructive force because it's taking advantage of something that's so good, it removes the shame out of it, because you're like, it's not your fault. Somebody gave you a smartphone. That's what I tell teenagers. They didn't give you the manual on how to use it. They just gave it, put it in your hand and said, all right, go for it. And of course, we all know what's out there and how this works. Then really, when you've laid out that foundation, mentorship and understanding and uncovering the why, what values are governing my life? Where am I going? Why do I want to make the decisions that I want to head in a specific direction? And when I start talking about my goals that are enforcing my why and my values and who I want to be, that's when boundaries make sense, because boundaries now become something that you are using to protect their yes, to protect their dreams, to protect their goals. And so we could talk about boundaries of what those clearly look like, but not enough time right now. But I want to dive into more of the why, because that's the title of this talk. And so breaking free from pornography, you have to have a very incredible why behind that. You need to know what you're doing, where you're going, or it's not going to happen. And one of the things I say is that the internet is often like this crazy street. And when we talk to kids about it, we're like, look at all these cars. You could get run over. You could get pancaked. There's probably a truck that will come out of nowhere. Stop, look, and listen. But really what they need to hear first is, what's on the other side of the street? What's the point of going across there in the first place? Why am I even doing this? And so if you give them and start having that discussion based on your conversations in that R.U.M.B model, you can start to develop what that why looks like. And really what we're realizing, and this, I'm going to bring this kind of coming into an end here, that all of this stuff that I've talked about, the social media and the pornography and this AI system that is so good at manipulating and pushing in front of them, grooming them into a product that when their brains are hardwired and solidified as adults, that they will be the product of the tech industry forever. That is their mission. My mission at Wired Human is to reconnect them to their heart. And I'll tell you why this is so important. Is your heart is where your why is. Your heart is the reason that you cross the road to get to the other side. It's you reflecting on yourself and deciding who you are and where you're going with your life. And when I look at this ring here, what I'm realizing in my own life, and I'll be vulnerable too, I struggle with this type of stuff with my attention, because it's the algorithm, the AI is so good. The minute I hit boredom, the first thing I reach for is my smartphone. And if I happen to be courageous enough to get through the boredom, and we'll talk about teens too and kids, then the inevitable anxiety comes in, because what does your brain do? It's programmed to look around you and do an evaluation of what could hurt me. It's how can I, making sure that my world is safe around me. And it does that. So we start thinking about the things like our exams coming up and our stresses at work. But if you can get through that last layer and get into your inner heart and start asking ideas of, what do I believe in? What are my values? Is courage important to me? Is faith important to me? Is family important to me? What's my goals? What kind of career do I want to do one day, and why? These are things that I like to call like shower thoughts. because that pretty much is the only place today, that and maybe doing exercise and other things, where we don't bring our smartphone and we actually have profound thoughts in those moments without our technology in our hand, where we actually reflect on some of this stuff. Sometimes the solution pops into our head, and it's like puzzle pieces. And we get a puzzle piece and we say, that's a piece of who I am. And we plug that in and start developing our identity outside of this garbage and tech. But it takes a process of coming to a quiet place and reestablish a connection to heart. And one thing on that side note is that Sun Tzu wrote The Art of War. He said that if you disconnect the commander from the front line, you get chaos, you demoralize the troops, there's fear beyond belief, and they are almost guaranteed to surrender or retreat. And that's what the tech industry's goal is, to do this generation: disconnect their heart, get them to surrender, conform to be the product, and sell them at mass scale. And we're going to take them a completely different direction if we reestablish that heart connection through this process. So really, that's discovering who I am. As our kids, as youth, as we bring them on this journey of what are these puzzle pieces, challenging them to go a step deeper. I have a whole school that's now taking a school period just to reflect and do journaling, to be able to help kids find what their puzzle pieces are and reflect on themselves. And really, at the end of the day, what we're trying to get to is this: who knows you best? I said that at the beginning, and I said AI knows you best. Well, actually, the reality is our children, our youth, ourselves, we should know ourselves best, who we are and where we are going. What excites me? What makes me feel alive? What are my values? Faith, courage, strength, family, things that I set up in front of me and say, that's going to be the guiding principles of my life. And so when the internet comes with this impossible measurement system, and all of these things it shoves in our face, we don't get measured by the internet. Our children do not be measured by the internet. Neither are they their self-worth measured by the internet. They measure the internet by who they are and their values and where they're headed with their life. And garbage comes in, garbage goes out, because it's not worth their time and their energy and their attention. So that's the direction we need to take kids. So I want to give you a clear example of this, and I'm going to end now. This is my goal for every child in the world, is that they know clearly in this digital age, strongly, who I am and where I'm going. And everything plugs into that. And I'll give you an example of what that looks like. This is my youth coalition at Wired Human. We have about 40 youth that go to DC, that advocate on the Hill, and they've all done the trainings that we provided for them. They've all done our coursework. We have trained some of them one-on-one for years to be able to have the experience to be able to go in front of national news. And they have done extraordinary things. And these are kids who know who they are, they know where they're going, and they know the truth behind technology, and they're using it as a tool and not allowing it to be a destructive force in their life. And this is an example of them going to do a press conference with Senator Blumenthal and Senator Blackburn, who passed COSA through the Senate 91-3. And they got up and spoke. We had an amazing opportunity where Kayla and Judah got invited on Fox News with Dana Perino to talk about the big tech CEO hearings and what's going on and why youth voices are important. We had the opportunity to go there ourselves and present to the Judiciary Committee members, the youth. In the bottom left here, you can see them talking to their staff about the 70 stories they collected and put them in their hand right before they went out to question Mark Zuckerberg and the other CEOs. Kayla in the middle here has been invited to the White House to come and speak in front of the smartest people in our nation that got flown in to reflect on this. And a great testimony of that is that she stood up strong and proud when she was faced with somebody saying that addiction is stigmatizing. We can't say that youth are addicted to their smartphones. She said, no, that's not true. I know this generation. I am this generation. And all my friends, everybody I know is struggling with addiction with smartphones. We need to make a change, and we need to make it now. Opened up the door to talk to Dr. Vivek Murthy, Surgeon General of the US, and share with him our stories and our content through their voices, which ended up in the New York Times, and him commenting and sharing about Wired Human and his decision to put warning labels on social media like cigarettes. And lastly, this is Simpson, a fifth grader. And this is a kid who, on his own, after one of our events in DC, saw a senator sitting in his seat in the front and got his little stuff together and went to him with a card and said, I need to tell you why Section 230 of the Communication Decency Act is destroying lives and how social media is impacting my generation. And when we raise up a generation like this fifth grader that has the confidence and knowledge to know their voice is powerful and capable and stirring and moving, I think we actually have a shot at defeating this monster of pornography through their voices, through their experience, and giving them a platform to speak. And so if I would give you one challenge today, think about the youth and the children in your life, that if you raise them up to be that future generation, to set the change that we need to see, and to raise up a new level and a new standard for social media and pornography, that it isn't allowed to take advantage of our youth's lives anymore. It's not allowed to crush families. It's not allowed to destroy marriages. That if we had an army of youth rising up, they would shut the industry down. I'm convinced of that. So one challenge, go through that process with somebody who's close to you, who a youth, could be somebody in your family or a relative, or maybe you're an aunt or you're an uncle or you have your own children. Go through that process and realize that their voices are powerful. And there's something so different about when you actually carry the knowledge and own it as a leader versus just knowing it as knowledge, that it raises you up to the next level. So thank you so much for listening today. Thank you, Gail Dines, for giving me this opportunity in Culture Reframed. And I am so happy to answer any questions and follow up on this discussion with anybody who might like to.